Welcome, another episode, Dr. James Beckett, Sports Card Insights here with Rich Klein. We're going to talk about some aspects of sports cards that would relate or be helpful in a homeschooling context. In other words, what could a younger or older person learn from reviewing some cards? We'll consider some older cards, some newer cards, certainly some Topps, Panini, and Upper Deck cards, our faithful card company sponsors. Thanks also to Heritage Auctions, Huggins & Scott Auctions, Mike's Stadium Sports Cards, Burbank Sports Cards, ComC.com, and Beckett.com, Beckett Media, Beckett Grading, Beckett Authentic.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for fronts and backs, because fronts you learn how to see how a picture works, how to visualize how somebody looks at something, and the backs are text or numbers. And so depending on how much you dig in, you've got spatial recognition a lot of times on the front, and then on the back you've got ways to teach geography. You've got spelling ways to teach. You've got math. You've got things there. And you've even got things to tell people, hey, don't do this in a sentence. Like the famed 1964 Dennis Bennett Brick Wise rookie card. This 19-year-old right-hander is only 18 years old.
How does that
19 or 18? You don't, hey, kids, don't put that in a sentence. He's 19. This right-hander is only 19 years old. You can even use that to show how you fix grammar. And teach grammar that way. And for a couple of years when we were at Beckett, I know I did a few, and I know Dave Slipka, one of our teammates who you've interviewed, has done some. We went with Brad Newton to various schools and did various sessions on how to use, in those days, it was today we call it the junk wax or the overproduced era, but how to use baseball cards to teach people. And they were very well received. I mean, I don't think the kids realized what they were able to learn from reading the backs of the cards, because it was fun in those days.
Well, let's, you're bringing up the fronts of the cards, and I think that's interesting. I immediately gravitated toward the back of the cards, but the front of the cards, like you said, on the spelling, is that there are many different ways to spell a person's name. And so there are a lot of, counterexamples that would open up vistas for young people to see that there's other parts of the world, other cultures that phonetically or not, have names that would draw someone into a dialogue with a parent or somebody that knew a little bit more about, hey, where's this player from?
Well, and speaking, like a lot of the Spanish players have the name Jesus. Yeah. Well, Jesus is spelled the same way as Jesus. Yeah. So if you have a Jesus, you can explain, Jesus, if you're a Christian, you can explain Jesus is very important, but he's also very important in the Spanish culture because, and the fact that they're naming their kids Jesus and pronouncing it a little different is not anything bad. It's actually quite the compliment, and then you look, and then as you said, phonetics, there's I think Wilson Contreras of the Cubs, the catcher, he has 2 L's in his name. And, and every time I type his name in ComC, I have to be careful to remember that, hey, 2 L's, not just 1 L.
Will Olson,
yes.
Well, I mean, again, there's the typical way to spell something, and then but when you're picking your kid's name, you can spell it any way you want to, and then when you find your way to a baseball card. So just the name, there's some information there. Reading, our culture has moved more and more toward more fragmented reading and writing experiences. I'm not just thinking about Twitter, but a card back has only a limited amount of real estate, and so it's hard to write a short blurb that's meaningful and short, but there are a lot of people that don't like to read 600-page books, but to read the back of a card, which might be equivalent to Twitter, 280 characters, they can read that, get the gist of that, and if there are 20 words on the back of the card and they understand 19 of them and not the 20th, many times they could understand what that word would be in the context of how it fits in the sentence.
Well, switching to the comic book world for a second before we go back to baseball cards, one of the great things about Stan Lee when he would be interviewed is they always throw, I'll use the term SAT level words, into the Spider-Man and the Iron Man and the Fantastic Four comic books and all those characters. And the reason they were thrown in was to subtly teach the kids, look up this word in the dictionary, look how it works in the context. It's also very easy to learn when you have a photo of the character saying those words. And so it's a great way to teach. And if I remember correctly, the early days of SCORE, and we at Beckett wrote an article, and I don't know if I was at Beckett at the time or was this before I got there, was Les Woodcock, I believe was his name, was a longtime Sports Illustrated writer, and he wrote and edited all those bats for SCORE in those days. And so they were well written bats. And so you in a short period of space, you got a lot of information that was well constructed, grammatically correct, and good ways to read. And then you had some career stats too, so you could look up players and do basic math and basic numbers. So there's a lot of really cool things. And then the players from different parts of the world, even back in the day, people would come from different parts of the world and play in all these sports. I mean, I believe Stan Mikita was born in Czechoslovakia, and if he's born in Czechoslovakia, where's Czechoslovakia? Where's Romania? In the early 90s, Slava Fedosov came from Russia. Yes, we know that Russia is where, but where in Russia did he come from? And why is that important that he's coming? You could even use that as part of current events in world history to know, hey, Russia is now a more free country in terms of people are able to leave during this period. And here's one of the results we're getting where people coming to the country, from these various countries.
You mentioned comics, and in my neighborhoods growing up, I mean, the kids were either interested in comics or they were interested in baseball cards. And one of the hassles of the kids that were in the comic books was establishing to their parents or whatever that there was redemptive value in the comic books. That the themes were, because there was a lot of fantasy and a lot of superhero stuff, and so it was kind of important that the good guy win and that the story arcs were positive. And so for Stan Lee to throw in a few words that would help, they say, see, it's an educational graphic novel. On the other hand, when you have a sports card, there's no such concern. I don't think any mom or dad was ever concerned that their kid was going to get bad ideas from reading the backs of baseball cards, specifically math. Do you think what math? I could make a pretty weak case for the fact that the budding, and people, when I would teach statistics, they would say, when am I ever going to use this? And I use a lot of sports examples. Well, calculus is another math course that gets a bad name, but you could actually learn some calculus. The other aspect from certainly from my experience with my own kids, I mean, when you say, hey kids, sit down, we're going to have a lesson, they're going, oh dad, but if there is a lesson that's learned along the way that they're not being force fed, that's frequently better because they don't put up their guard. And so my point about calculus is that calculus is really about the different rates of change and trends and more subtle things in mathematics. And so you're kind of priming the pump that they are looking at the back of the card and they can see that a 27-year-old is trending up, who's had more home runs each year or more RBIs or increasing batting average. I mean, those are calculus can calculate some aspects of that, but deep down, this young person or older person, whoever, is looking at it and saying, I think next year is going to be a good year because I can see the rate of increase is increasing. That this person did this in AAA, but now they have a lot of potential and they're only this age. So there's higher reasoning skills that they just kind of pick up, I think.
I think you're right. I never thought about it in those terms, but you're right. How did the player do between the two seasons? And that's something you do see even on a lot of the more current cards. They may only have the last 4 or 5 year stats, but that's sufficient for that purpose, how they're doing season to season. And then if there are massive changes, you can say, okay, he really took a step up, or she really took a step up. Or, in baseball, they went from a bad hitter's park to Colorado. And Colorado, the ball travels further because, they're up where the air is lighter, and the ball travels a lot further in Colorado than it does in, the Astrodome of the 70s. You can do a lot of that stuff that you couldn't normally do, on just a theoretical level, because you've got a real life example showing why.
The one of the not controversies, but one of the tacks that some of the people take in education is hopefully in their minds an increased emphasis on STEM, science, technology, engineering, math, and those are more hard sciences, I guess, or more. They're the kind of things that there's a right answer and a wrong answer, and not the answer doesn't depend. You can calculate the answer, but there's also a group that says, well, that's if we only focus on STEM, that's too narrow. We need to make it STEAM and add an A for the arts. Well, don't you have all that in a card? Because kids are learning that a card that has bad design on the front, if the art is weak, then it's not going to be as collectible. And kids, I think, can know from, I mean, I think there's some, it's not unanimous, but there's some sense that this is an attractive card. And I think that's one of the ways kids can learn about good design, the art aspect of the proportionality and all that. And then they get to turn it on the back of the card and looking at the math aspect, or asking the kind of why questions that come up in science, like, does a ball really curve? Is it really curving? And is a knuckleball really knuckle? Well, just be on the receiving end of one of those, and you can see that it's hard to hit because it ain't straight.
And I think you're right about the art. I mean, even, we know that 53 Bowman is so much more popular than 54 Bowman.
Yeah.
Partially because the design is so much better. We know 57 Topps is actually so much more popular than 58 and 9 Topps by collectors because, again, it's a more beautiful card. I mean, 58 looked great when Heritage did it, many years later, but to me, it never was anywhere near as attractive as 57. And 59, it's the smallest photo, I think, of the player on the card for a long time.
Well, what the problem is that you can't, I mean, there's an ebb and flow in all these things. And so you go from maximal to minimal. You go from the pure card aspect. What do you, and again, this is the same thing in life and in learning and in design as well. What do you do for an encore after 53 Topps? Color. Well, you do black and white. Okay. Well, now what do you do? Well, you do sepia, whatever. I mean, there's just a limit to what you can do when you strip it down and make it super simple. Like 57 Topps is more attractive, but it's simpler. Well, what do you do the next year? You have to swing the pendulum back a certain way. Same thing on the card backs. There need to be some distinctive, and it's to engage and to draw in the collector, the person, to say, hey, this is interesting. I'm going to roll up my sleeves and dig into this.
By the way, I'm going to speak for both of us here. We commend everybody who's listening, who has kids at home and is working on teaching them right now. And working with them.
And not that cards are the only way to do that, but if your kids, it's like Diane was asking me about my reading experience as a 12-year-old or whatever, and I said, well, I won all these awards for most books read, in the 6th grade or something. Well, they were all sports biographies, I mean, I would have done that for no credit. But and I don't think I could have gotten credit for reading the backs of all 572 baseball cards. But if they'd give me credit for that, I mean, I probably did it anyway. So it's, but you don't think of doing that. It just happens organically. And
I think especially when we were younger, we couldn't just turn on our computer screen and look up everybody's history. The backs of the cards is how we really learned about the players. Yeah. It was our personal touch to the players.
Yeah, but yeah, you're right. The learning experience. I think there's the two things I would say. One is that if you can instill in a younger person a love of reading, because reading is going to carry you through, and some at least, if not loving math, being able to find the usefulness in math and being able to handle that, and having some kind of appreciation for what's hopefully more attractive, then you and all that could come from sports cards, and it would be helping that young person develop into a well-rounded member of society. I think reading is key,
and there's more to sport, and that's what we're saying. There's a lot. Sports cards are fun. We love them, but if you need to teach your kids something, sports cards gives you so many outlets, and hopefully in a fun way for them to learn more about their favorite players or their favorite team or players on their favorite team, or just more in a way that's not seemingly as dry and academic as, what you had to do to get your PhD. I'm sure that was dry and academic. I'm sure you didn't write about, stats on the back of the baseball card for your PhD.
But no, I didn't. But I mean, basically, and again, I don't know that this is wisdom, but in the way it evolved, the fact that if you look at the T206s, that's really pretty small. You look at a 5x7 or an 8x10. If that was filled up with verbiage, that would be intimidating. It'd be sound like be reading something take you a few minutes to read. The beauty of having a 2.5 by 3.5 piece of cardboard that has some level of permanence but needs to be handled with care, and then you can read the back, and you can read the back in 15 seconds, and you can glean the key information. Again, that's helping a young person realize how to kind of synthesize the essence of something into a bite-sized chunk. And then the next year, there's something that might be similar, might be different, but might be an update. So
don't forget T205 had stats and text on the back of their cards.
They didn't have it there. It's just that it's I can no longer read it. I just want to be on the record to say that I can no longer read that, but I know it's there, and I got to bring out my my reading glasses. But like I said, it's not too small, not too big. So it's not as intimidating. And like I said, if you read that, what's on the back, and you understood all the words except one, that's a better way to learn a new word than having your mom or dad say, go look it up in the dictionary, or now you don't have to turn a page. You just ask Siri, I guess.
The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards. The man in the house of cards is doing all right.